It's a real pleasure to welcome Richard Bullard to the Caring CEO. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Great to be here, Graham.
Richard, what does care in the workplace mean to you?
We're going to start off with a simple question, right? I think it can mean many things, but ultimately, I think it means seeing everyone in the workplace as a human being. What do they need to be okay? What do they need to feel like they belong? What do they need to be able to have the energy to do the work that you need them to do? So I think if you have people as the center of answering that question, then you're well on the way. Yeah, because it genuinely is around we're human beings, we have basic human needs. We can't divorce those from ourselves the moment we walk in the door at work. We still have those needs. So we need bosses, we need colleagues, and we even need people who work for us that I think can recognize that and can respond to those needs in appropriate ways. So fundamentally, it's having compassion, even having love, to be able to love others as fellow human beings, I think is a really important thing to be able to bring to life at work. And if you can do that, and I think that's what I've aimed to do, that's what care in the workplace means for me.
I love that you put it all back to us as humans and how we relate as humans, how we feel that we belong or don't belong, how we feel heard. And I know we should disclose to our listeners that this isn't the first time we've spoken.
Certainly not.
We should thank Katie McMurray, who introduced us at a seminar probably about 12 years ago, I think, something like that. And we've had lots and lots of walks in that time. We've shared lots of things, good and bad, that have happened to us during that time. But I love that, just bring it back to, the human need for connection. I know that you've had a really fascinating career. You grew up on the North Shore of Sydney and, really, as the North is, it's quite a privileged area, but you chose a really interesting direction for your career. Would you mind just telling the listeners a little bit about some of those early adventures?
Oh, I love the way you use the word choice. I don't know. I don't see my career as having been much choice. It's just sort of these crossroads have presented themselves. And to me, I guess the choice has been around which path do I take, as those crossroads have emerged. And look, I mean, well, I guess some might say and challenge that and go, well, you behave in a way, you've made choices leading to those crossroads that have meant that those crossroads then emerge. And certainly for me, one of the key things I did that perhaps led me to that first crossroad was I went backpacking through China and Tibet back in 1987. That was the 1st of October 1987. Found myself in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, and there was an uprising. And the short version of it, crying, because I'll stick to the short version of everything I experienced that day, was I had, as a 21-year-old, just out of university, I had a Tibetan man shot and killed next to me. And I remember a young Tibetan boy taking me to his father's place to safety, because clearly this was not a safe place to be. And I'll never forget this older Tibetan man saying to me, look, I'm Tibetan and I can't leave my country. Yeah, but you can leave my country. Please go home and tell your people what the Chinese security forces and the Chinese government are doing to my people. And I think that there was a couple of things there. It's just, as you said, that extraordinary sense, that realization in that moment about what privilege actually means. It was quite mind-blowing to think, you mean you can't leave your own country? You don't have that freedom to be able to go outside those borders. And, look, a big part of that was just my naivety at that point too. But it really hit me hard. And I think it kind of, it really did shape a significant part of who I am today and who I've been in that career. And at that point, I'd had this dream to be a screenwriter. I'd done what you do and worked at the ABC in film archives, very diligently for many months. Finally got that job to go down and be a story boy, as we called it back then, in the story department at GP, which was a socially responsible side at the ABC. Anyway, fast forward to how long was I there for? 2.5 years into that role. And I'd kind of worked my way up, was now a trainee editor. The next step was to be an editor, and then the step after that was to be the screenwriter. So you genuinely had to kind of work your way up and pay your dues. And the producer, I went in to have a chat with him, and I said, "Look, Bruce, I've had this opportunity. The Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is coming to Australia, and I've been asked if I could do his PR, so his national tour. But I need a few months. I need 2 or 3 months off." And I remember Bruce said, "Richard, it's time you made a choice. Said, either you're going to go and do this human rights stuff, this Tibet stuff, or you're serious about being a screenwriter." He said, "You've got your first script as trainee script editor." Said, "I see a bright career for you. You will be a screenwriter." And it was genuinely in that moment that he made me choose. I was like, "Oh, okay." And in the end, it wasn't a choice, that my sense of purpose, I guess, at that point in my life really, really drove me to kind of go, no, this is an opportunity to work with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm going to go do that. And if I can get back to screenwriting, I'll try and do that. But I never did. So I never made that way back, if you like, into screenwriting, but rather that set me on a path where it genuinely was about creating platforms, giving, and ensuring those who aren't normally heard are heard in wherever, in whichever sort of, I guess, corporate position I've been taken. But so that, for me, that was then going off to an international human rights organization after doing that extraordinary, it was just the most extraordinary thing to be able to do, was work with His Holiness and work with His Holiness closely. And just an extraordinary human being. And then it was in the Netherlands. It was an organization co-founded by the Tibetan government in exile. And I'd been asked to go to Dharamsala in India and spend 6 months. I volunteered. So, look, I'll come and teach you all that communications and how to do PR. So I was going to go off and do 6 months of that in India, and found myself in the Netherlands in this organization co-founded by them called the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. I organised the PR for their 3rd General Assembly, which ended up being on CNN, Time Magazine, Newsweek. Coverage was extraordinary. My view was it was a story whose time has already been told. This was back in 1993. And they asked me if I wanted to stay. And they said, "Look, could you take on a head of communications role and not go to India, not go to the Tibetan government in exile?" And I said, "Well, that's up to the Tibetan government in exile." And they chose and told me to stay in the Netherlands with UNPO. So I guess there's 2 choices. There's 2 of those crossroads for you, Graham, in terms of, I think, key moments that then shaped many of those crossroads that came later in my career.
Yeah. And then, as I understand it, you spent some time at the Body Shop and with the Anita Roddick, who was the founder then. What was your role there?
Oh, look, she funded my last year in my role at UNPO. And because of that, I was known to the Body Shop. And in 1995, there was Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other Ogoni people in Nigeria who were about to be executed by the Nigerian, what was then military dictatorship. And the Body Shop asked me to run a campaign to stop the execution. And that was during the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Auckland in New Zealand. And I said yes to go and do that. Ran that campaign with Ken Saro-Wiwa's son, Ken Wiwa. And we met, the number of heads of government we met in those few days before November the 10th, 1995. Now, we were ultimately unsuccessful, and his father and 8 others were executed by that military dictatorship. And as a result of that work that I did at that point, for no pay, I just did that because I felt the issue was really important. The Body Shop offered me a job as the human rights campaigns manager in global corporate affairs. And that's where I found myself in December 1995. I can still remember having trouble to get him down to Brighton because of snowdrifts. And I just thought, what have I done? How did I agree to a job where getting to work is a problem in snowdrifts? Anyway, I don't think snowdrifts is that big an issue anymore in the south of the UK or south of England. But it certainly was in 1995. And that led to, 5 years of working in that public affairs role for the Body Shop International. And I did everything from writing speeches for Anita Roddick. And I can still remember the first speech I got back, which was only a page long. It wasn't a long one. I don't think there was a single word left that I'd written. It was all red. Uh, and I was very pleased to say after about it genuinely took me about a year, I think, but after about a year, I could get there and write a speech that at least it didn't come back all in red. I mean, not that she followed it when she got up to speak. I mean, she really followed the prepared speeches when she spoke anyway. I mean, she was such a fantastic off the cuff orator anyway. But that was from doing speeches to running global campaigns. In 1998, I had the privilege to lead a partnership with Amnesty International and ran a campaign on human rights defenders across the body shop stores in 36 countries, which is just the most extraordinary platform to think about it for positive impact, and really proud of that work because a number of those people that we campaigned for were subsequently free. And to me, that's that's an extraordinary way to have the positive power of business be used.
That must have been the first position of its kind. I'm sure there weren't many other roles specifically around human rights working for companies.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I'm always wary of sort of saying it was the first, but it sort of would have been one of the first. We were very much the Body Shop and Ben and Jerry's. I think we're very much in sort of parallel in terms of pushing the boundaries around responsible business. And they had a lot of focus on supply chains as we did. And my role involved also looking at policy settings and complaints around what was going on in our supply chains. So was it the first? I don't know. Was it one of the first? Yeah, I think pretty close, and I seem to have managed one of the first roles or one of the first in a number of those decisions that I've made in my crossroads and in my career. Yes.
And what led you to then leave that role and come back to Australia?
I don't think it was entirely clear. I did leave the Body Shop after 5.5 years and then started in consulting and did that with a number of ex-Body Shop people. So that if you think about my career when I was doing the human rights work, I was running global campaigns against companies that are now, major clients of where I've ended up. And then I spent this time in the business. So, worked against business, worked in business, and then worked with business as a consultant from when I left the Body Shop. And actually the primary reason we came back to Australia was because we had a 6-month-old. And we just decided, of all the places, Hiker and I, Hiker I met in Brussels and Belgium. She's from Belgium, from Flanders. And we just decided that, bringing up kids in Australia, it was one of the best places in the world you could do it. So moved back to Australia in 2001. Actually, it moved back bizarrely with work. So when you're a self-employed consultant, it's pretty amazing to be able to do that. But I came back to be the social auditor for Normandy Gold Mining Company's 5-star assessment program. So some people might remember the name Robert de Crepney, but he made his money by being one of the first accountants to take control of mining companies, and he did that with Normandy and grew it and did a spectacular job of growing it, and curiously, genuinely brought in innovations around accountability that have gone on to actually shape the industry. So I don't know, there's something perhaps conceptually there around what accountants do or what accountants give support to, key staff to do in terms of accountability around performance, in terms of safety, environment, and for me, community relations. It was exciting work to do, and it was very exciting to come back to Australia with a young family and have a job in the bag that involved me traveling the world, actually. That was a privilege. That was a privilege to be able to go around the world and spend a week in a mine site and, kick the tires around how are they managing and how they're governing community relations.
And it then took how long before you then started Banara?
Well, I didn't have the name, but effectively that was what I was doing.
That was what?
Yeah, that was the start of it. And I think, the next sort of iconic client was Westpac, and becoming the auditor of their first sustainability report, the Smashed Tomatoes report. That was 2002. And when did the name Banara, look, that grew quite quickly, that Westpac job. And there was a moment there, I think 2004 it was. And I was just like, got all these subcontractors who are helping me do this big job. Am I really capturing, is there some value here beyond just what I'm doing, earning for myself? And I went through that whole kind of challenging myself and thinking around what do I do with this? And that's when I decided I would set up my own business. And rather than being a self-employed person who had a whole bunch of subcontractors who then I passed through work, I decided to set up Banara and start employing people. Yeah, and that was, I think, 2004, 5. It might have been 5, yeah.
And I guess that was quite a risk, because, when you start a business and you have people full time, there's ebbs and flows of business. Did you ever think that wasn't the right strategy at one stage?
Oh, yeah, plenty of times. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder why it made it so difficult for myself. Because, I could have easily just taken, a role in a larger organization and set up a similar business within a different, within a context that isn't quite so challenging, because the buck stops with you, right, when you're a small business owner. I don't know. Maybe it was something like I really, my father's always done that and set up his own businesses. So maybe there was at some level, I was looking for approval or following that footpath. In retrospect, I think it was because, I know, I remember what it was. It was because I had a series of such poor bosses. I decided that's it. I'm now going to be my own boss, and I wanted to be an example for others. I wanted to give others an example of what a good boss could be. Yeah, and I genuinely, thinking back now, that was the primary reason. I was just so done with having, and it's not that they were bad, but just mediocre. You know what I mean? It's inspiring or managing in ways you go, how do you think that's going to motivate me? I'm not motivated by those things. You might be, but I'm not. Yeah. And it'd been, from my screenwriting days, working at Roadshow Coot and Carroll, where, it's just, I learnt a lot. I have to say my business leadership skills, probably for those first 10, 12 years, were all entirely lessons in what not to do. Which you kind of go, that's a long time, isn't it? To kind of be taught by what not to do. And I just got fed up and I just like, enough's enough. Let me have it up. And is it really that hard? Surely it's not that hard. And it turns out it wasn't that hard. I mean, there were times that I just regretted the way that I chose to do it. Certainly 2014 was one of those where I had to make, grown the business to 20 people. It had done really well for a good sort of, what was that, Mary? How many years that was, if you think so, from 2001.
Sorry, would you mind just speaking up a bit, Richard? It's getting a bit quiet.
Sorry. Yeah. And it'd gone really well for many years. And then we got to 2013 or 14, and there was a downturn in the commodity market. We were very exposed to mining. I'd always thought I'd manage that by exposing the Banara business to gold, because when things are tough in commodities, gold always goes up, right? Like it is at the moment. Gold is very healthy at the moment while there's such uncertainty in the world, and certainly uncertainty in capital markets. But that year it didn't. That year gold went down with the market. And that resulted in a really significant drop off in business. And I had to make people redundant. And without a doubt, I think in all of my time leading business, that's the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah. Did you see, how have you seen things change in the human rights consulting in the time you've been in it now, in Australia in particular?
Oh, huge changes. Early days, a huge part of what we did was educate. So we had to educate the clients that these were the reasons that they needed the advice that we were offering. And I think the UN did some really significant work in terms of getting Professor John Ruddy to articulate the Ruddy principles, the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And when they came out, while they were voluntary standards, they effectively became de facto. If you were a responsible business or a major business, you had to have a response, to the UN guiding principles. And that was a real game changer.
Yeah.
And then the second wave, if you like, here, particularly in Australia, has been around modern slavery. So having federal and state-based legislation around making sure your business isn't causing harm by having slavery practices in your business or your supply chain or associated with your business, that's also been a real game changer. So I think, to me, if I look back at my sort of over 20 years, almost 30 years in terms of business and human rights, the landscape now is unrecognizable. I mean, when I started, we learned on the job. There was no university courses, let alone being able to do a degree. And now you can do courses and you can actually major in business and human rights. So what does that mean? Fundamentally, that's business being really, I guess, really committed to not causing harm in the way that it operates. Some might kind of go, human rights and business human rights, that's just sort of another woke commitment. And I'd really seriously argue, no, it's not. It's not. It's genuinely not. Managing risk is one of the key enablers of business. Capital markets, your investors want to know that you're managing risk. The more sophisticated that you are in managing risk, I think the higher the quality of management is and governance in an organization. Sort of firmly believe that. And that goes from harm and, it can be psychosocial harm, if we talk about well-being and those sort of areas, or it can be you've got slave labor in your supply chain. So it can be practices in terms of hours, in terms of expectation of how you're managing people that you're causing psychosocial harm at work within those who are in your direct control, or it can be those that you have influence over in your supply chain. Where people you can have children, you can have people who are bonded through debt or through being prison labor. And we have, some of the world's most significant economic bodies. One of the most significant ones is the prison system in China. It is an enormous economic actor in the Chinese economy. Its contribution is significant. Prisoners through their labor paid for that system, and that therefore the system is entirely motivated to be as efficient and as engaged with the overall economic system in China that it can be. It needs to supply goods and services to just survive, just to be able to operate. And therefore, when you start looking, it can be surprisingly close how close prison supplied goods and labor can be to regular supply chains in a place like China.
Yeah. And then, you had the opportunity about joining KPMG. What led to you saying, yes, this is a good idea?
Well, it's a great question. I'm just going to have to unpack that a little bit. I was on the board. I'll tell a little bit of a story then. Look, I was on the board of the UN Global Compact. So those 10 principles that businesses commit to under the auspices of the UN in terms of being responsible businesses. And I was on the UN Global Compact Network Australia with one of the KPMG partners. And I remember I was having the redundancies, and she sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, Richard, I think you've got a great business. I know you're having a tough time at the moment. I'd have a chat with my CEO and with my chair, and we think that, it'd be great if you consider joining KPMG. So it was really funny because KPMG were doing the valuations on the sale because they, I then took the next step. I mean, curiously, I went through as all good business owners should, you try to test the market and talk to the others and sort of see who else might be interested in buying your business. But at the end of the day, it was really on the KPMG that were prepared to buy the business in the team. So that, because I downsized, the team, I think at that point was 12 people. And what I was really keen to do was make sure that they were looked after. Yes, they were going to choose to come with me. I wanted them to be, looked after in the way that I would have looked after them as though they were still working just for me. And KPMG understood that, and they respected that in terms of the acquisition process. And look, I turned the business around. I had many moments where I just thought, what am I doing? This is all too hard, particularly a big beast like KPMG. You think about how boutique I was, 12 people. But they were particularly keen because I did have the Westpacs, by that point, Newmont. We only had blue chip clients really because we were doing really boutique work, which is successful boutiques generally can do, big end of town clients, because of the services they're offering are so unique or specialized. And we successfully got into that position. And I can still remember it was the 1st of August 2015 was the completion date. And I was, there were moments there where I just thought, nah, it's too hard. They're asking too much. This isn't going to work culturally. But I stuck at it. And then on the Sunday before that completion date, my oldest almost died. So yeah, two of our three kids were born with significant disabilities, and Kai had ended up that weekend at Westmead Children Emergency, and the lead of his team, of his medical team, said, "Look, if you got here 10 minutes later, I don't think he'd be alive." So that was quite a moment. I remember Monday morning, the partner from KPMG just said, "Oh my goodness, Richard, look, this is the most important thing. Just let's put this off. We'll postpone it on Friday. Let's just give you the time and the space you need to focus on the most important thing." To answer your question, it is all answered in my response to his offer, which was no. This has taken, I think by that point, we'd been going for about 9 or 10 months, right? The process had been going, and I was just absolutely exhausted by it. It was almost killing the business. And I said, no, there's nothing more important than my decision to sell to KPMG and to create space and comfort in my mind so that I can actually give more attention and more bandwidth to, what's going on at home. Because you can't, it's really challenging to do that when you're a business owner. But if you share that with others, which was the whole idea of moving into KPMG, I was looking forward to having that support around the challenges that come with that. To me, that was just when he made that offer, and I just said, no, let's just go through with it. There's nothing more important than getting the sale done, because that's taken, being a business owner, it's just taken more time than I want to give it. And I'd much rather be just part of KPMG. So we went ahead. Yeah, we went ahead on that Friday afternoon, and Monday morning I turned up at my new job at KPMG.
It's impossible not to race past what you mentioned about losing your son, Kai, and fast forward, and I know that you've also lost your second son, Bodhi, both before they became 20. Like, that's extraordinary for anyone, any parent, I think, to even contemplate. How did you and your wife get through that?
Well, I think you don't get through it. We were just reflecting it on it yesterday. It's almost like, grief is this movie that just keeps playing in the back of your mind. And it's not just in your mind. I mean, it's absolutely in your heart, and I think energetically as well. That's what I've particularly noticed since Bodhi died last year, is my energy reserves. I just don't have the energy that I used to have, particularly for work. So I don't think you get through it. I think what you do is you make sense of it, and you genuinely go, I'm going to use this unexpected season of my life to pay it back, to have this positive impact for others as possible. Because both Kai and Bodhi, Kai is the 6-month-old that we brought over from the UK, and probably about a year later after that, from when he was 18 months old, we realised what was then probably going to be the rest of our lives with him, in terms of significant physical needs, and also in his case also bipolar, so some really complex mental health issues as well. And for Bodhi, when he was unexpectedly born, because he was our third surprise child, hardly planned, but he had the same genetic issue that Kai did, right? So we had then, from 2006, we had two. And it's fair to say that our lives were fully absorbed by their needs and supporting them. NDIS was absolute godsend, I have to say. And despite its challenges, yes, it has its challenges and difficulties, but certainly hugely, hugely helpful. And when Kai died, we didn't have too much time to really kind of think it through, or to, yes, we didn't, because it was just straight to what Bodhi needed. And of course, we had a third son, Yasha, who's in the middle, neurotypical, but he still had his needs as well. And I think with Bodhi being there, that was, in some ways, that was just, we needed to be busy. It wasn't that we were making ourselves busy, we were busy. And that didn't give us much time, perhaps, as we've had since May last year. So when Bodhi died last year in May, that was an overnight change. That was a complete transformation. After 20, what did I say, 18 months. So if you think Kai was born 2000, 2022, it would genuinely just over 20 years of, for me, I'd get home on a Friday afternoon and then I'd click into support mode, right? Because Hydra had been doing that primary role from Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
And then I would do that, well, that would be my full-time job during the night as well until Monday morning when I went to work. So for me, it was always going to work on Monday morning was the kind of recharge, the relax, take a breath. And that was always, the other way around for Hiker in terms of, she'd have that opportunity on the weekends.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say, though, there was less opportunity for her to do that because she would be around, whereas I would just have to go to work and I would be at work. And that would create a clear distance between us and her role as the primary carer. And that changed overnight, literally overnight. Though you wanted to die home, we honoured that wish. Kai did as well. His death was relatively fast. Bodhi's was much more prolonged. And I think although ironically, Kai's death was much more traumatic because of the lack of palliative care that we had, was Bodhi's. We had the most excellent palliative care. They were very different experiences. I have to say, for me personally, the change in my life from the day after Bodhi died, it was so dramatic.
Yeah.
Because you go from not having to think about what do I do with my spare time, because I had no I had no spare time other than the time I booked in the Navy, to suddenly going, you see, and we still catch ourselves, right? I've got to go do this for Bodhi. Even a year later, because it's so in your routine.
Yeah.
Because, both of them were so significant. Everything was, particularly personal care, all of it needed our manual intervention to make stuff happen. Whether it's cathetering or whatever it might be, all of that, the sort of medical procedures that we had to learn as parents and primary carers were quite significant. And you don't have to do that again. So it was a really big change. And through that, I found particularly a real question around, really? Do I go back to KPMG? Do I go back to what I was, is that really where my meaning in life comes from? And it was a genuine, because I had 7 months off, and I have to say how grateful I am, to Andrew, because I report to the CEO as the Chief Purpose Officer, and he was just so supportive, as was everyone else at KPMG. And I remember him kind of going, when I said, look, I think I'll come back 1st of October. And that was 7 months, right?
Yeah.
And that's a long time, right? And I just said to him, look, I think I need that time because I can't do the role that the business needs me to do without coming back with 110%. Yeah.
Yeah. What we've sort of breezed over as well through the very, very, tragic circumstance of losing your son is, you're being promoted into the Chief Purpose Officer and the role that's played for yourself. And I know that purpose has always been very important to you. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time now encouraging other people in KPMG to think about it, to think how to apply it. How did having that sense of purpose assist you during those incredibly challenging few years where you lost 2 sons?
Yes, I wouldn't have gone back to KPMG. I think I would be struggling a lot more if I didn't have that clear sense of purpose. And, I think that was the case through Kai. It wasn't just their deaths, but I think it was as a parent, you'll do anything for your children, no matter what they need, right? And there's no question when I reflect back, though, is that, both our kids, they required a lot, a real lot. And in many ways, I was able to frame that as me within my purpose, right? It was, the way that we also, Hiker and I became key advocates then for the MDIS, right? Because not many parents who have, 2 children with really complex complex medical needs, let alone significant disabilities that require, from the moment they wake up or even when they're not awake, require your attention and your time. You then have the time to go and advocate. Yeah, and that was part of, for me, moving, that strong sense of my purpose around giving voice to those who aren't otherwise heard, or ensuring all voices are heard. And it really allowed me to reframe some really tough times, and I think some really dark times.
Yeah.
Because you also just kind of reflect on, you do. You have those moments where you go, oh, what would my career have been like otherwise? Yeah. If I hadn't have had, if I'd had, three kids that had not, just that difference. If you only do that for a moment, I have to be honest with you, Ryan, because it's not really helpful. It's meant to be helpful. No, it is what it is. And what can I do now is a more challenging question. And it certainly was a really key part of me making that decision to come back to KPMG. Because I've spent a lot of time, as you say, reflecting on my purpose. I've got some firm beliefs of that, and we do in the purpose practice at KPMG, but your purpose is written in the past. It's who you can't help being. And for me, I am that extrovert. I love being up in front of, people, and to create moments of magic, where all voices are heard, which is my purpose. KPMG gives me a platform to do that, to live my purpose like pretty much nowhere else could at the moment. And I think that's been a really important part of the healing process for me, or even just the sort of sense-making process for me, being able to come back to work and being busy at work. And the last, this year has just been amazing as we've delivered Purpose Weeks, and, which are central to our purpose program. And as you say, is being able to bring the power of purpose at an individual level, at a team level, at a firm level, to over 9,000 people at KPMG. I get so much energy back from it. It's just, it is exactly what I need. In fact, I said to Andrew last week, I said, been here 10 years, and those two first Purpose Weeks, Melbourne and Canberra, I said, I think they're the most impactful weeks I have had in my 10 years at KPMG.
Wow. And what was it that happened in those 2 weeks that you saw that you were influencing people, resonating with it? What was it that made it so special, do you think?
It's really simple. Energy. Genuinely energy. To see people come into a session, even a 10-minute session, which is a bit of fun, filling a card around what does purpose mean to me? What does the word purpose mean to me? We're pulling most people in because they're free food. Unfortunately, yep, that's the case still. Whereas you bribe people with a bit of food, just see the smile on their faces, when they're filling in the answer to that question. Or we've now developed, the last couple of years, we've developed it now. Really, we're expanding that quite significantly. A program called Purpose Forge, which is 5 hours over 7 weeks to connect and uncover your personal purpose. And we give tasters of that during Purpose Week. And to see people come to the end of a 40-minute session or an hour and a half session and see them take those steps towards connecting with their personal purpose, and just to see the energy that they take out of the room, having done that. I mean, as people who have been saying to us, is, oh my God, this isn't a conversation I expected to have at work, or wow, this is, you don't see others investing time in our people in the way, KPMG's doing to, in this area of purpose. And I think it's that individual purpose work that we've really focused on, because, one of our, another core belief is, unless you can fit, your personal purpose to some extent into your team's role, and then fit your team's role into bringing to life the firm's purpose, you're not genuinely tapping into that energy. That is the power of purpose. And there's a Harvard published piece of research that we always go back to, that says if you can make that fit between your personal purpose and your firm or your organization's purpose, you're 14 times more likely to want to come to work. And as I say to everyone, who doesn't want a piece of that? Imagine that.
Wow. That is extraordinary. Are you aware of other organizations that are doing a lot of work around purpose?
I participated last year in a PhD student's project, and she's introduced me to over 70 chief purpose officers around the world. So until I participated in that research, Graham, I would have gone, I've Googled and I've found nothing. You know, I mean, yes, you find a handful here or a handful there, but she's actually found this cohort, which is just extraordinary. I think over 70 chief purpose officers that she's then interviewed, and she's now publishing off the back of her work as well as finishing off her PhD. So it's certainly happening more than a sort of casual Google would suggest. And I think there's something there around how do we take that, how to respond to that increasing challenge or that ongoing challenge. I don't know if it's increasing, but ongoing challenge from young people as they come into the workforce for it to have more meaning, than when you and I came into the workforce and asked for meaning from our employers, right? Because we wanted meaning out of the work. There's no question about that. I think more meaning is expected, and hence that conscious process of being able to articulate, it's much more powerful conversation to have with your manager. You can go, look, my personal purpose is to create moments of magic where all voices are heard. Now you can work with that, right? As a manager, you can kind of go, oh, okay, all right then. Well, how about we expand this aspect of your role, because that'll allow you to bring that part of your purpose to life a bit more. It's got to be much easier, right? And then as soon as you're doing that with your purpose, what are you doing? You're just generating so many more levels of meaning around the work that you're doing, because it's focused on what do I uniquely bring to how I do this role in my team. And then ultimately, you've got to be able to make that connection to the firm's purpose. And, that was why Andrew, when he rang me up 3.5 years ago, and he said, Richard, I want you to be the chief purpose officer at KPMG. And I was like, what's that? To your question, it's like, are there many? And I Googled it and I could find nothing. And he said, oh, look, in preparation for my CEO role, I've looked around and I've seen a lot of purpose statements that I would suggest are sort of languishing a bit with marketing taglines. I don't want that, because I genuinely believe that when purpose is brought to light, you create energy, you create aspiration, and ultimately that lifts performance. And that's Andrew's drive, right? He's got a chief purpose officer because ultimately he wants that to contribute to the performance the K can do.
It must be also, I believe, you mentioned the younger people coming through and they're definitely looking for more meaning and purpose in work, and all the stats say that. But we're also in incredibly volatile times, aren't we? There's many things contributing to that. AI, geopolitical tensions, all the things that are happening around the world. So you would hope that it does have a greater profile in organizations. If someone is working for an organization where that's not happening, what advice would you give them to begin the path to understanding their purpose?
Well, I guess there's two things there. One is, what do you do to invite the organization to be curious about the power of purpose, particularly in relation to performance? And, I mentioned, just one piece of research. There is a really strong body of work that's been done around personal purpose. There's, great, there are genuinely really borrowed a lot from the work of Nick Craig, who's, leading from purpose. He's probably, one of the better known speakers and publishers. And I think the research is there. The evidence is there in terms of the role that purpose can play in organizational performance, right? In terms of personal purpose, I'd recommend people do look at things like Nick Craig's work, Lead from Purpose. It's a great kind of step you through the process. You have Simon Sinek as well. He's kind of short, sharp, and quite to the point around purpose. I think Nick Craig's work is a bit more structured and is easier from a self-directed point of view to kind of follow. And, I think there's more and more people who are doing work around personal purpose. Everyone sort of does it slightly differently. For us, because we've had the opportunity to really define and hone what we do now with Purpose Forge using KPMG as our sandpit, right? We've had that privilege to be able to do that. Only now, after 2 years of scaling within KPMG, and everything we've developed, we will take to our clients, right? So we'll offer what we've done internally and what we're doing at the moment externally as well. But Purpose Forge, key beliefs in that is, as I've already mentioned, that your purpose is written in the past, and genuinely it's for you can't help being in whatever context. It doesn't matter whether you're at work, whether you're at home, whether you're with friends. And it's a good way to test if I get close, that I can say my purpose statement to my friends at the pub, and they'll go, "Oh yeah, that's you," or I can say it at work, and everyone will go, "Oh yeah, that's you." Separate impact from purpose, because a lot of people do confuse or conflate. I get up in the morning and I want to save orangutans, and that's my purpose. Well, no, that's the impact that you will have. What is it that you uniquely bring to saving orangutans?
Yeah.
That's you. Yeah, that's who you can't help being. That's written in your past. It's shaped by your past events and what you've experienced in the past. And when you connect with it now by articulating a purpose statement, and I always call a purpose statement like a group of, a row of cups that you fill with meaning. And when you say that statement, what you're doing is actually pouring out the meaning in front of those that you're with. And that's a wonderful opportunity for them to connect with you and for you to share with them. So that, to me, that's the power of, connection that comes through doing purpose work as well, which is where I've been really surprised actually about the sizes of teams and the challenges that we've been asked to come and solve with teams at KPMG using purpose frame, and that can be, align it around, common role. What is our role? And we frame that using purpose to, we're going to be doing a piece of work in 2 weeks' time, which is with a really extraordinary high performing team. They're knocking the lights out.
Yeah.
But what they want to do is not sit on their laurels. They want to take it to the next level. And they've asked us to come in and do purpose framed work to do that. So it's really exciting to kind of see purpose framed team-based work just broaden out across KPMG. And I genuinely am really curious about what we're going to be able to do with the purpose practice once we take it external.
I love how you come to life when you talk about it. And that's obviously that does really add fuel to your tank as well, which is fantastic.
It does.
I heard, I guess a saying by Maya Angelou that is, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And so for each of us, that's a different definition. And I think it's another way looking at success, looking at purpose. It is something when it's really genuine. It's something that you're proud of, intrinsically proud of. You're not looking at something outside, you're looking at something within yourself. And I think that's when it really comes out as well. I used to be in recruitment for about 15 years, and I think you've had a very interesting career, Richard. But, just amazing. But you can also see the connections, and all the things that you've just described. I always say
there's genuinely a thread there, particularly you can draw that thread and you go, yeah, I get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And the reason you made decisions along the way confirm there is a pattern there. And, even in, the greatest personal tragedy, you were able to see something there of benefit, even though there's obviously lots and lots of pain and loss and adversity. So it's wonderful that even in something like that, and I think also of, that person who we haven't mentioned today, Viktor Frankl, man's search for meaning, and, the incredible agony he went through to, come to writing that book and developing logotherapy and all that sort of stuff. And, great pain, real meaning. I always finish by asking a question, and that question is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give let's go to 21. When you arrived in China, what advice would you give that person now that you know now? What you know now?
I don't know. I'm genuinely struggling with it because I kind of think surely you want to give advice that you'd make a better choice, right? Or you'd take a slightly different direction. There isn't anything different that I'd want my 21-year-old self to do. Bizarrely, I'd kind of go, if anything, is just sort of almost like relax, enjoy the ride. It's like, don't be too worried about where you'll end up. Just focus on what you do best, because there's opportunities will come. Those crossroads they've always come for me. And I guess it's a bit of trusting the universe in that respect. But no, there's nothing there. I don't know, maybe think about setting up your own business a little bit earlier, but then would I really want to have done that earlier? No, I don't think so.
But I think what you just said, relax and enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
That's knowing that the journey is just as important as the outcome. And
Yeah, if not more important, 'cause
yeah,
I've just learned so much along the way. And, honestly, you kind of go, oh, was that my bad luck in having such poor, or difficult leaders, in my early years? And I go, no, I learned so much more from them, so much quicker than if I'd had really good leaders, right, in my early years. Because you do, you just, those that rub you up the wrong way, those that are genuinely, looking to work against you, they teach you so much more, so much quicker. But having said that, I'm very pleased to have ended up, with the leaders that I have now around me, because, I think I've earned it. Very pleased to have the permission that I have now to do what I'm doing with Niplates at the moment. It's genuinely exciting to be able to do something that's different within, professional services. And it does create a sense of excitement and a sense of energy. As Nick and I stated, we're in the energy business. And I think I've probably been in the energy business my whole life. So that young self, yes, relax, enjoy the ride, and don't forget you're in the energy business. How's that?
yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Well, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, Richard, and thanks for sharing so wholeheartedly about, the ups and downs of your life. And also thanks for being a really great mate for me. You've really been there for me when I've been through some tough times as well. And, good friends have got to be part of that ride, haven't they?
They do. And it's been absolutely mutual, because you've done the same for me, and that's been greatly appreciated, Graham. It's certainly, just that phone call every now and then, and the habit, right? I just love our regular walks. Doesn't necessarily happen every week, but it does happen on a regular basis on Thursday morning, and you make it a habit. And it's funny how you miss it, right? Once you miss one or two, you're like, no, better make sure it happens. And it is so good for your well-being and mental health. It's a really kind of that self-care, as you would call it, right, Graham?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Self-care isn't selfish.
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Richard.
Enjoyed it, Graham. Thanks.
Look forward to catching up for a walk soon.
On a Thursday soon. All right. Talk soon.